Welcome to Questions from the Closet. I'm Ben Shalati.
And I'm Charlie Bird. Each episode, we discuss a question we commonly get asked as LGBTQ plus Latter-day Saints.
We're not trying to answer this question or come to a consensus, but simply sharing our perspectives. Today's question is, what's it like to go to conversion therapy?
Ben and I are not terribly diverse, and we share many opinions and life experiences. For example, we both had pets growing up.
However, there are some pretty big differences. For example, I just had a cat, and Charlie's family had a whole farm.
Tell me about your cat.
We had a number of cats growing up. My dad didn't like dogs, but he would allow cats. So I like cats. Yeah, and one time my mom stole a cat because she has Alzheimer's.
She stole a cat?
Yeah, there was a neighborhood cat that was like an outdoor cat, and she started feeding it and like letting it into the house, and then it just started living with us because the cat didn't know any better.
But it was like, it wasn't a stray. It was like literally someone else's cat. Yeah, it was someone else's cat. And I had to like tell the neighbors, I was like, I'm so sorry. My mom has Alzheimer's and she stole your cat. And they're like, as long as the cat's happy. I had so many pets growing up. Like, I had weird pets. Like I had a deer for a little bit. I had a coyote for a little bit. I had a turkey.
Is it legal to have a coyote as a pet?
It just kind of showed up.
Okay.
And so I was like 8 and I was like, I'm going to feed this coyote. I think probably the most interesting though.
What do you name the coyote?
I don't remember.
Okay.
Probably Wiley.
That makes sense.
Is that I think that's was its name. But one time there was a calf that was born and it was sick. And I think I think the mom had died in labor or something.
Oh.
Anyway, so we loaded it up into the back of our family's Suburban and we took it home because we needed to take it to the vet, but it was like super late. And it would like slept on the floor next to my bed because I had the hardwood floors in my room growing up. And then I woke up in the middle of the night and the cow was gone.
What?
And we had like this like really big ranch style house. And so like in the middle of the night, I'm like running through trying to find this calf. It was so funny. I found it in the hallway, like on the opposite side of the house. And I like had to like drag it back in. It was awesome. Yeah, I had a really fun childhood.
Well, we grew up in different places.
We definitely
My mom
did.
stole a cat. You lost a cow.
Yeah, I did. Anyway, we like to provide a variety of voices and perspectives. And today we're happy to be joined by Dustin Lichty.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, Dustin, tell us a little bit about you.
My name's Dustin Lichty. I'm from Provo, Utah, born and raised. Grew up here and then went to Southern Utah University to go to college and studied dance performance and biology there. And
Very common double major, I'm sure.
Yeah, so many dancing scientists. And then left to go to veterinary school, did that through Utah State and Washington State, which is where I graduated from, and then went and did a rotating general internship at Purdue University in Indiana, and then moved to Tacoma, Washington.
What?
To work for a year, and now I work here in Salt Lake City as an emergency veterinarian.
You're a seasoned vet.
Yeah, I've been a vet for just over 2 years now, 2.5 years. Yeah.
Did you have pets growing up?
A lot of pets, yeah.
Did you have a coyote?
I did not have a coyote.
What about a cow in your bedroom?
Not a cow in my bedroom. We did. My dad bought a cow for us when we were kids. It was a calf. He bought it at an auction with the point of you need to know where your food is coming from. And so we raised the cow and then we
ate it?
No, we did eat it. We didn't kill it ourselves. We took it to a slaughterhouse and they did it for us. But yeah, we raised the cow. I think the craziest pet I had growing up was at one point we had a pet raccoon.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah, my dad.
They have opposable thumbs. It's kind of creepy.
Yeah, my dad works for the Division of Wildlife, and so I've been around a lot of different crazy things.
That's cool.
Nice. And Dustin, you love to bake. You brought us a cheesecake.
I did. I love to bake. Cheesecake's my favorite dessert, and I know Ben loves the Golden Girls, so I figured what better way to celebrate.
So we just chowed down on cheesecake and talked about which Golden Girl we would be.
Yeah.
We kept it on the table so it could be in the video. It was delicious.
It's beautiful and delicious.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Dustin, we're happy to have you here today. And just as a disclaimer, we're going to talk about some tough, really vulnerable and hard things today. So if anyone's triggered by conversion therapy, you're also going to talk about some more adult themes. And just want the listeners to know that this is going to be a heavier episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Dustin, why don't you give us an overview of the therapy you've done so that we can kind of get a lay of the land and then we can dig into what the experience was like for you.
I did want to make a mention here at the beginning that, the two fears I had about coming on this podcast to talk about this specific topic is that people would either take away a really negative view of my parents or about the parents of anyone who has been through conversion therapy. And then my other fear is that people would think that I'm anti the church or anti LDS. And that's not true. I'm definitely still a member of the church. But I just want people to be thinking about those two things as they're listening to this episode, because I don't want those two messages to come across.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, I think you guys chose me specifically for this episode because I've been through conversion therapy twice. Once was during high school. I went for about 2 years there. And then once was in college after my mission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So help us understand like what led you to go to conversion therapy when you were a teenager?
Yeah. So, I mean, that was a recommendation on church leadership. So when my parents found out that I was gay in high school, which I think it happened not just to me, but to a lot of people, it kind of raises a lot of questions for a lot of LDS families, because there's this idea that, in order to have true joy, you have to be in a heterosexual marriage with kids. And not only is that the only way to find joy, but it's also the way to find salvation. And so when you have a child who is not able to fit that mold of getting married to someone of the opposite sex and have a family, you're left questioning, how do I help my child find joy? How do I help them find salvation? Because I want to spend my eternity, with my family. And so, especially in like the 90s and before, there wasn't a lot of information on this topic, and so naturally the place that people turn with those questions is to their church leaders, because this is something that relates to the gospel. And at the time, the recommendation from church leadership was conversion therapy, because this was something that was viewed as changeable. That idea first started probably back in like the 1950s and 60s, very heavily pushed by Spencer W. Kimball and the Miracle of Forgiveness. I actually wrote down a couple quotes. Sorry, I have my notes here with me, just so I wouldn't forget things.
Can I ask a question first? Yeah. Did you tell your parents, or did they find out somehow?
Yeah, I didn't tell them. It was they just found out that I was gay. It wasn't really a choice to come out.
That's so scary. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And you're 34 now?
I turned 34 next week.
Okay. Oh,
yeah.
Almost happy birthday.
Thank you.
And so this would have been like 18, 19 years ago.
Yeah. So this would have been when I was about 15, 16 years old. Yeah. But so I wrote down this quote from Spencer W. Kimball that's in the Miracle of Forgiveness. And it says, "Certainly it can be overcome, for there are numerous happy people who were once involved in its clutches and who have since completely transformed their lives. Therefore, to those who say that this practice or any other evil is incurable, I respond, how can you say that the door cannot be opened until your knuckles are bloody, till your head is bruised, till your muscles are sore? It can be done. Accordingly, some totally conquer homosexuality in a few months. Others linger on with less power and require more time to make the total comeback. The cure is as permanent as the individual makes it." And so that quote right there, is giving the idea that this is something that is 100% changeable. And so that idea that this is something changeable allows families to have hope that their child can have those things, that marriage, that salvation. And that's something that was promised to these people, parents specifically. And, some people who were also adults at this, who read this and thought, well, maybe I can change this. So not everybody was told, to go to conversion therapy when they're young. Some did when they're older. But there was this idea at the time that this could change.
Yeah. Charlie, I noticed you had a reaction to the quote.
Yeah. I used to read that quote all the time. Like in high school, I read it all the time. And when I got back from my mission, and I haven't read it or heard it in years, just because I avoid it, because it brings up a lot of shame and self-hatred, and it's just hard to hear. It's hard to listen to and take myself back to that place where I was just hating myself, because I was thinking, well, I guess I'm not trying hard enough. My knuckles aren't bleeding enough. Yeah. And at the point where I was stretching myself so thin and doing everything I knew how to change this part of me.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into it a little later too. But so this quote for me didn't come into my life until I was on my mission. My first mission president really heavily encouraged all of the missionaries on our mission to read The Miracle of Forgiveness, and I'd already been through 2 years of conversion therapy, and it obviously hadn't worked. And then I read this book, and when I got to this part, it just made me feel like it was all my fault that the conversion therapy didn't work, that I hadn't tried hard enough. There was something that I was lacking in that made it so this wasn't working. And it put a lot of shame and burden on me. And that's why I ultimately went through the process again later in life, because I felt like, I hadn't done enough.
Yeah. And Dustin, what was it like for that? What was that like for you to believe that it was your fault that things weren't changing?
I mean, it just makes you feel like, you're not enough. Like who and what you are and what you're doing is not enough. And it almost kind of makes it feel like God is not happy with you, that he's not granted your request because he hasn't seen enough effort from you. And so it puts a lot of pressure on you to be perfect, to do more than you are now so that this will change. And it makes it so that whenever there is anything that you notice that's not perfect, it becomes a big deal. This is why I'm not changed yet. I'm not doing enough. And that shame, I guess, gets worse and worse the longer it goes on.
It sounds like every mistake you made then became amplified.
Yeah.
Because that was then the reason that you weren't getting the desired results.
Correct.
Yeah.
So this first time you went to conversion therapy sounds like it was kind of, I don't want to say forced, but like heavily encouraged by parents and church leaders.
Yeah. So my parents met with our bishop, to figure out what to do here. And that was conversion therapy. So this would have been early 2000s. And there was at that time a book that was printed by the church called Understanding and Helping Those Who Have Homosexual Problems. And in there it says, it is important for you as a church leader to help members understand that regardless of the causes, these problems can be controlled and eventually overcome. And so that was the material that my bishop, had
referenced
to go off of. And so conversion therapy was strongly recommended at that point. Yeah.
So when you went to it, like, what did the therapy look like? Like, walk us through, like, you go meet with a therapist.
Like,
what
how
happened?
nervous are you this first time walking in? Or are you excited?
No, I mean, it was definitely put to me in a way that, this is trying to help you. This is something that we're doing because we love you. And that's the point I wanted to kind of articulate about, my parents and the other parents, is that this is something that they did because they love their child. And that was definitely the way it was presented to me, was that this is something that we want for you because we love you.
And is that how you understood it at the time?
It is. Yeah.
And it sounds like that's how you understand it still today.
It is. Yeah. And I mean, I've heard, so the therapy I went to is not definitely the worst therapy that I've heard of. I've heard of, terrible things like electroshock therapy and vomit therapy and stuff. And I didn't have to go through any of that, but I've definitely heard these stories of parents who were crying on the way driving their kids to therapy because they knew what was going on there, but they were trusting that this was the best thing for their kid and that they needed this. It's almost that like tough love. Mm-hmm. It's almost been presented to me like the idea of, Abraham taking his son up the mountain to kill him, trusting that this was what God was asking of him and what needed to happen. And I think that's the idea of the parents who in this situation that, we love you. We know this sucks, but this is, best for you type of a thing.
Would you be comfortable sharing what like a typical session was like?
I mean, they varied. So I saw during the first time that I went through conversion therapy, I saw a couple different therapists. They were all with the same company, I guess you could say, in the same building.
Like the same clinic?
Yeah.
Same agency. Yeah.
But it was a couple different people. And it just kind of depended. Like they would ask me, how things were going at the time and then focus the session on whatever it was. But there was definitely kind of major things that were used as between all of the sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I went through and wrote down a couple of the big ones that I remember. one of the ones that stood out was like, I think specific to this therapist or therapy clinic, was something called ACT, which stands for acknowledge the thought, change the thought, take action on the thought. And the whole idea behind this is like, if you have a gay thought, like you see some shirtless guy running down the street and you're curious or, about it, acknowledge the fact that you just had a gay thought and then change your thought to something else. So for me as a dancer growing up, I'm going to focus on dance and think about choreography or something. And then the take action part is now use your body to work out something on that thought. So get up and start tapping or doing whatever. And the thought was, over time, you're just going to no longer have those thoughts because your body's realizing that you don't want to think about those things anymore, which is kind of the idea of just turn it off. It's just not,
Yeah. Are you thinking about ACT?
I was thinking about whether or not you two met at tap class.
Oh, no, we did not.
I didn't go to tap class till I was an adult.
No, but that is funny because there's a modality called acceptance and commitment therapy that is like known as ACT, like ACT therapy, and it's not that.
Yeah, it's different and wonderful.
Yeah, this obviously, like we know now, like doesn't work. Just like don't think about it; it'll go away, and that doesn't work.
Yeah, and what was that like for you? Like you would be attracted to someone, you would tap, and then like what was that like for you? And by tapping you mean like tap dancing?
Yeah, like tapping my feet and stuff. So, I mean, honestly, it wasn't that bad. Like that, I feel like of the things I went through, like that was probably the least damaging. That was just kind of a like way to think like, okay, I have this thought, I'm going to move away from it. But it definitely didn't bring like the idea of shame to it, like some of the other stuff. But that one wasn't that bad. And I think it was actually of the therapy is probably something I enjoyed the most because I got to dance and do other stuff like that. But it definitely, over time, the longer you go through this and the more you're realizing this isn't changing.
Sure, it gets frustrating.
Yeah, then it would get frustrating.
Yeah. I remember the song that we learned as children, hum your favorite hymn.
Yeah.
And when I was an undergrad at BYU, I had this ring. I probably told the story before, but it was a return with honor ring my mom had given me when I left on my mission. And whenever I would think some guy was cute, I would just like twirl that ring on my finger and then I would hum a hymn. And to try and like not think about it.
Did you find though that like, because this is something I found, like when you were twirling that ring, now you associate that with gay thoughts, right? And so then whenever you're twirling it, does that bring back things? Because I found at the time, like now I associate like tapping my feet with this ACT therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't do it as religiously or as consistently as you did. So for me, no, it doesn't. But
I feel like that's kind of what it did for me. Like it didn't really obviously change my gayness, but it definitely like
it made tap dancing more gay.
How is that even possible? Yeah. So walk us through some other things that you might have done in therapy when you were a teen.
Yeah. So one of the big things, which you guys have brought this up on a couple other podcast episodes, is, trying to determine like the root cause of like why you became gay. Mm-hmm. And there's like many different theories out there. And so it was kind of presented to me as like, we need to find what your root cause was. Like it's different for different people. We need to find what yours is. And then if we can figure that out, then we can reverse it type of thing. So ideas like you had an overbearing mother or a weak father, or you were molested by a man when you were young, or you were given gay pornography or something like that. And so we went through, questions of different things, and none of these things fit for me. I wasn't molested. I didn't get exposed to gay pornography. My parents are great. Mm-hmm. None of these things fit. And so we just kept searching and probing all these questions. And it just kind of put a lot of shame onto me as, you're not telling us, why haven't we found this cause? What are you hiding type of a thing? What is your root cause? And it became just this thing of, I cannot figure this out. I cannot figure out what I did to cause this.
So it sounds like that was incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, it is, because when you're presented with the idea of, if we can find the root cause and we can change it, then you want to find the root cause. And so not being able to find it makes it feel like I cannot change this until I do this.
Yeah, Dustin, as you're talking, I'm realizing that like today, people are trying to avoid causes of quote unquote like making people gay. I was just talking to some leaders of a stake I was speaking in, and they were just concerned like my speaking would get youth to maybe like think that they were gay and then question it, and they were concerned that by thinking and questioning might lead them to develop those feelings or think that they had those feelings. And so I tried to like say no like that's not going to happen, either you are or you aren't, and they just like kept pressing like, well, we really don't want these kids to think they're gay if they're not. And I think people are still concerned about what's making people gay and how can we fix that and or avoid it in the case that I'm talking about.
Yeah, and with all the science and stuff, we don't, no one knows what the cause is, and I think it's a fruitless endeavor trying to shield your kid from every single thing that could ever possibly turn them gay, because there's so many theories out there of what it could be. And then, like I said, none of those things that anyone has ever suggested has ever resonated with me.
Right.
Some of the other things, so I was encouraged really heavily to participate in like manly type activities, which for me was a little challenging because I grew up in the dance world and the theater world and the music world.
Yeah.
And those things were, especially in the 90s and the early 2000s, viewed as
the girly,
feminine, gay type things. And so, you need to do basketball, you need to do wrestling, you need to go out and spend time with the guys and stuff, which almost, it made it worse, because I already had this idea that like I can't have the life in this realm that I want, like the dating relationship type realm. And so the thing that's bringing me joy at that point in my life was my extracurricular activities, dance, theater, music, those type of things. And so it was almost like it was being taken, that was also being taken away from me too. Like I couldn't have this other part of my life because I was gay. Mm-hmm. And the straight people in theater and dance and music, they were fine to have those things, but not for people like me. And so it just was making me feel like I had to fit every aspect of my life into something I didn't want, not just one aspect, but all of it.
That sucks.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I mean,
that's so sad. And you're just like a kid trying to be happy and dance and perform.
Yeah. And
I'm so sorry.
That's the one thing that I definitely like refused with conversion therapy is
no football. Yeah. That's where I draw the line.
This is the thing that's making me happy. This is what I need. I really don't want to do these things. And, the other part of this is there are plenty of people in these quote unquote manly activities who are gay or somewhere on the LGBTQ plus spectrum.
I mean, I grew up playing basketball.
Yeah. And obviously doing those manly things didn't cure anybody else's gayness. So why was that going to?
It's possible actually that like my shot got better with the wrist.
Well, what else do you want to share about your experience going when you were a teenager?
Yeah, so this is kind of where we get into the more like a little bit traumatizing,
the nitty gritty
parts of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I was encouraged with my therapists to talk about explicitly any sexual fantasies that I had, that they would question me about, if I found a certain person at school attractive and, they wanted me to tell them about all the thoughts that I had about this person and stuff. And to pick these apart and try and figure out psychologically why I was having these thoughts. Oh, do you like him because he's actually, popular, because he has a nice hairstyle or whatever, and you're jealous of those things. But it went a little deeper than that. It was also like the actual fantasies and stuff that I was experiencing as a normal 16-year-old kid would be. Mm-hmm. And trying to morph those fantasies into a heterosexual type way. I was very specifically told at the beginning of starting therapy that this is, I don't know if this is too much to say for this type of podcast.
Just say it, it's okay.
I was told that seeing myself in these fantasies in a top role was going to be better for my conversion than if I was seeing myself in like a bottom type role. That was going to be easier to switch over to a or heterosexual fantasy. And so that was something that they really probed me on quite early on.
So for translation, that's like a more active sexual role than a passive. I don't know. Is there a better way to say that?
I think that's fine.
I don't want to be super explicit.
Yeah, I don't want to be either.
So Dustin, you're a teen talking explicitly about your sexual fantasies, and then you're being coached into what those sexual fantasies should look like.
Correct. Yeah. And which can be really, really awkward when you're a 16-year-old kid and you have a 35, 40-year-old man talking to you and you're being asked to divulge this information and talk to them.
Yeah, and like somebody guiding the way you should think about
sex.
Sex, yeah.
Yeah. At the time, what was that like for you?
Awkward. Really awkward. And it shifts the idea of all of this to be about sex.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it all about sex, and it's something that shouldn't be that way. Like this is such a bigger thing than just sex.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask, since we're already controversial in this episode and we've given the warning, I have people ask me sometimes about nocturnal emissions.
Yeah.
When we usually don't even cover any sexual material, but I remember again, this is normal part of male puberty, and the first time that happened to me, I was super confused. I was like, oh, what just happened? But it was a dream that with a guy. It was a guy in the dream, right? And I remember it wasn't even sexual at all. I'd never seen pornography. I'd never seen a naked man, but it was just a relationship with another male.
Right.
And I felt a lot of shame because of that. And looking back, it's actually I don't know. I think it's telling in a way that I had no sexual experiences whatsoever at all. And then my body naturally was drawn towards men. Right. But I'm wondering if that was part of conversion therapy at all. Cause that's a really taboo topic that people don't talk about. But I'm a lot of people I've talked to are feel really shameful for those non-controllable dreams that they have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it definitely wasn't part of my conversion therapy. But looking back on it, I personally didn't feel shame about that kind of a thing because it wasn't something I could control. Mm-hmm. It was more of just evidence to me that
you were wired the wrong way.
This wasn't changing. That the conversion therapy hadn't worked yet because I was having these uncontrollable thoughts, and they were still about men.
Yeah.
Well, Dustin, thank you for digging into your past and being willing to share this with us.
Yeah. You're so courageous.
It's been a while, so I've had time to process this and come to terms with it. The last thing I wrote down is probably actually the worst thing that I experienced through this, and that was that I was definitely given pornography during my conversion therapy process, and encouraged to masturbate and do all of the things you normally do with pornography to help me,
I'm guessing these are nude women.
Yeah, like Playboy type magazines and stuff.
And so it's to associate women with sexual pleasure.
Right. The idea that if you're aroused, then it's being aroused to a woman, and that if you're having a climax, that it's about a woman, and so that's going to rewire your brain to associate pleasure with a female's body.
Yeah. I went to conversion therapy. It was 1.5 sessions when I was an undergrad at BYU in 2008 when I was 24. And my therapist said, in the whole session, he didn't ask me any questions the whole session. He just went through all the attractive parts of a male body, all the attractive parts of a female body. And the only question he asked me the whole session was, do your genitals function properly? To which I said yes. And then he said, well, I'm not going to give you pornography, but sometimes you just like, you'll rub against your jeans a certain way and you'll get aroused. He said, every time you're aroused, think of the beautiful parts of a woman's body and that will make you straight.
Yeah.
That's what I was, so not quite as explicit, but that was the same theory that was being told to me in 2008.
And when you're not wired that way, when you're not like, when you don't find those things attractive and desirable,
like?
it becomes icky.
It
feel really
icky
gross.
to talk about.
Yeah, really when that's happening.
Well, even just like the thought of like somebody like giving pornography to a minor and encouraging them to masturbate to it, that like feels super icky
and illegal.
Yeah. Right? And it's like,
yeah, and
it's shocking that that's like so commonplace.
Yeah, and I think people are thinking, 15 and 16-year-old kids are
already
almost adults,
yeah.
but you're a minor. Your brain is not fully developed at that point, and pornography of any kind is going to mess with your brain.
So might as well mess it the right way.
Yeah, I guess. But I think there's even a deeper level, at least for me, when I was experiencing this, and that is that I spent every general conference growing up hearing about the evils of pornography. So it's evil for my straight peers, but it's good and I would say necessary for me in my journey, which is really confusing to have to think about. And the same thing with the masturbation, evil for them, good and necessary for me. And so when you're in those,
confusing.
Yeah, when you're in those moments of trying to, okay, I need to look at this, I need to do this, you feel gross because it's not something you want, but also you feel like you're sinning because this has been told to you that it is bad and sinning.
What was your relationship with God and the church like as you were like in that phase of conversion therapy?
I feel like just like every other little Mormon boy in Utah at the time, I was really active in my Aaronic priesthood quorums and trying to do the right thing so that I could have this thing changed about me. And I still had a strong belief that the prophet was the mouthpiece of God, and that this was necessary for me because it was coming from church leadership. The last thing I'll say is that it also the pornography thing also made this issue very much a lustful, sexualized thing. The other dichotomy here was that my straight peers were being told that women were daughters of God and needed to be seen as such and not objectified and treated with respect, and I was being told I needed to
objectify them.
Yeah, I wasn't complete until I could sexually lust after a woman's body.
Yeah. Dustin, I'm just like feeling a lot of like pain and sorrow for this like little kid who's just trying to do his best and just be good and has to go through all these tough things.
Yeah, it was definitely something that I kept hidden as much as I could because I didn't want people to know about. And I haven't talked about this in a long, long time. And the other thing I want to say is that my parents didn't really know, what was going on with conversion therapy. And I think that's the way it is for most parents. I think this was treated for me like a bishop's interview where this was between me and the conversion therapist. And so it wasn't something that I actively talked about with them.
Like that's that thing that you got going on, maybe like a check-in, how's it going?
Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't, and if my parents had known, what was going on, this definitely would have been a different story.
Yeah. Well, Dustin, thank you for just being so open and vulnerable. You said this is something you haven't talked about in a long time. I'm just wondering, like, how are you feeling? How are you doing?
I'm a little tense, a little nervous, but I think it's something that needs to be said. And so it gives me a little bit of courage because I don't want other people to have to go through this. And something you shared, Ben, on the last podcast you did on conversion therapy was that you watched that documentary, Pray Away. And there's the quote, as long as people don't know about, or as long as people think that this is a problem, this is always going to pop up. Mm-hmm. And that the conversion therapy is going to come back. And, there was this idea in the mid 2010s of, conversion therapy kind of going away, and then now it's starting to kind of pop back up in certain places. And so I think it's important for people to know about what this is, and how this affects people, so that it doesn't have to affect someone else.
Yeah.
Well, if you want a friend, I can join you in on some of that tension and not wanting to talk about this. I feel like pretty impacted by everything you're saying, because I relate to it a lot. And I've kind of mentioned this before, and I don't know why. It's like, I feel like I share everything. I probably overshare on this podcast, but like this aspect of like my like past, it just feels so like grossly disconnected from who I actually am, that it's so horrible. And I consider myself lucky because I never like had to like be driven to a place and walk in and meet with someone. But like you were saying, like if this is viewed as a problem, this is going to come up as a like quotate, like air quotes solution. And so I was just like devouring material on how to make myself straight. And a lot of the stuff that you practiced, I was like doing to myself.
Yeah.
And so like hearing your reactions to it, I'm just like, yeah, I remember feeling that horrible and that like disgusted with myself. And especially that last thing you said about like masturbating to like nude women. I like tried to do that a few times, and I like never felt worse. Like it was just disgusting, and it felt so like so cheapening, and like I couldn't do it. Like it wasn't alluring at all, right? It just felt really gross, and I just I don't know. It would just felt so backwards, and I felt like I was trying to objectify someone, which was so against the boy that I was and the man I wanted to be. And it's just, I don't know. I hate it. I hate that feeling, and I'm so sorry that you felt it.
Yeah, I'm sorry you felt it that way as well.
Oh,
Yeah. What would you guys say to someone who like is doing these things or considering these kinds of things right now?
I would say that it only brought me more shame.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was already a level of shame that I carried about being gay from what I'd been taught about gay people and what was said about gay people, both in and out of the church. But going through these gross therapies only brought more shame to me. And so it doesn't work. Those therapies just don't work. And if you're really looking to get rid of the shame, you need to focus on accepting yourself and loving yourself, in order for that to go away. These methods are not what's going to do it.
For me, I kind of already said this, but those moments were the most disconnected, sad moments of my life.
Yeah.
So mic drop there. That's what it does. That's what it did to me.
Yeah. And yeah. You know, I had all these times with the therapists where they would do these check-ins with me to, you know, we've been doing this for a couple months, you know, how are you feeling? What's your level of attraction to men look like? And has this moved at all? And every single time I would have to say, because I was being honest, that nothing's changed for me. This isn't working. I'm still just as much attracted to men and not attracted to women as I was before. And that got put on to me as, you know, it's your fault. This is not changing because you're not doing it right. You're not going and attending the basketball things like you should be doing, you know, all those things. There's all these reasons why it's not working for you, and it's working for my other clients. So why isn't it working for you?
That's what you're told. It was working for other people, but not for you.
Yeah. And
oh my gosh.
But which, you know, looking back on it now, it's like these people were lying.
Well, I was going to say, like, that's like really bold. Like, you have so much courage to just be like, yep, this is what's happening. Because I feel like I would have been like, oh yeah, it's all good, just so I wouldn't have to be doing that stuff anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, that was, there was some level of security about being behind a door with a therapist where I could tell him that it wasn't working. Mm-hmm. Whereas like if I had been talking to somebody else, like one of my peers or something, then I probably would have lied and said, oh yeah, things are going great. This is working. And I just happened to be that person that with the therapist. I wanted this to work. And so I had to be honest with him so that I could find the way for it to work, because it wasn't working. And I felt like if I lied to him, then we were just going to stay where we were.
Did you ever wear a rubber band and snap yourself when you saw a hot guy?
No, I just tapped my feet.
Because
Healthier.
I remember doing that too. Like along with associating the female figure with like good feelings, like pleasure, I would associate the male figure with like being hurt, like pain. And I know quite a few other people who have done that.
Yeah.
The rubber band was a convenient way. Yeah. It's like, look at my cool bracelet.
Well, Dustin, let's jump ahead. So you served a mission, and then after mission, when you were in college, you, without your parents encouraging you to, decide to go back. Why did you go back?
So,
and you went to a different place, I understand. Like you didn't go back to the same place you'd gone as a teen.
No, because I was living in Cedar City, going to college there. So while I was on my mission, I alluded to this earlier that I read The Miracle of Forgiveness, and definitely felt like the therapy didn't work because of me. I didn't try hard enough. There was something there that was causing this to happen. It wasn't the therapy itself. And so when I came home, I was expecting some level of this attraction to have gone away just from being a good missionary, and things hadn't changed. And so I had a really, really, really amazing stake president at the time, probably the greatest priesthood leader I've ever had. And he was non-judgmental and really supportive. And I met with him a few times, and he had nothing but love, but he didn't, as any straight church leader, doesn't really have a lot of experience in this realm. And so he was trying to help me by looking up things. And one of the things that he suggested was going to see LDS Family Services, which was what it was called at the time. And so he was more, it wasn't about conversion therapy for him. It was just, maybe you need someone who's got a little more experience in this realm than I have. Mm-hmm. And so I went to see LDS Family Services, and this therapist there is the one who recommended or brought up conversion therapy again, and I was willing to try it because of this idea that it probably works, because the prophet and the everything that's been published says that it works, and so, or past prophets have said it, and so it probably works, and so I'll try it again. I was kind of desperate to have it change.
All right. So how did this experience going to therapy in Cedar City compare to your experience when you were a teen?
Yeah, so it was different. It was much more PG. But it was, I was given a booklet that was printed by Evergreen, which is an organization that doesn't really exist anymore. But it was a LDS group designed for helping gay members of the church. It wasn't run by the church, but a group of LDS people who ran it. And that has since gone away. But anyways, so it was a booklet that I had all these different writing assignments in, and questions that were presented to me that I had to fill out and think about, and things like, what are your values? What are your goals? What things do you believe to be true? And how can your life, what choices can you make in your life to live those values and goals? So a little more, but I guess I'm not a.
That sounds kind of nice, like focusing on values.
It does, but I guess what I'm not articulating is the questions were definitely phrased in a way that was like, how do your values about sexuality, what are your values about sex and then those things, so it was definitely geared towards that aspect of it. But yeah, there were also things in the book like encouraging me to play basketball and doing manly things and establishing good relationships with men, because the idea that my relationships with men were weak, and so that's what helped me to become gay, and so fixing those would fix this.
Yeah. So why did you stop going?
I just got tired. I was tired of putting effort into all of this and not seeing any results. And I just slowly realized that this wasn't changing and it wasn't going to change. And that I was still in a place where I wasn't accepting of myself. I was still unhappy with who I was. But I just got to the point where I realized this isn't changing and I'm going to have to, I don't feel this way anymore, but that I was going to have to carry this burden for the rest of my life, that I was just going to have to force myself to be single. And then if I could do that, then in the next life, God would change it, that this was just a test.
Yeah. How old were you when you were like making that decision?
Probably around like 23.
Yeah. I went through a very similar process where I gave up on my career. I was just going to like hunker down, just have a lonely single life and just kind of white knuckle it till I died.
Yeah.
That's how I was feeling too.
And it made me kind of shift focus to be about other things in my life, like career and dance that I was involved in and stuff like that, so that I had something in my life that would bring me joy, because I knew I wasn't going to come from relationships.
It seems like talking to you now, you are pretty accepting, like affirming of yourself and your orientation. How did you get to that point, this point?
Yeah, it's been complicated, and it's only been fairly recent. I've only been out publicly for just a little over a year. Last January, I came out on Facebook and Instagram.
Congrats.
Thanks. But even at that time, I feel like when I was coming out, I still wasn't fully there. But it's definitely been a process of coming to terms with. And I guess we're kind of delving into that point that I spoke about earlier. Is for me, the conversion therapy was when I started to realize that church leaders were not infallible, and that's what I'd been taught to believe my entire life, was that everything that came out of a church leader's mouth was the will of God, and so that I finally started having to realize, this is years after I had been out of conversion therapy, but starting to realize, I had been given these promises and none of them came true. It only brought me pain and heartache. It didn't bring me any peace. It didn't bring me any change that I was promised. And so I had to come to terms with these unfulfilled promises, and then shift my relationship with God to be a personal one. It had to be me and him, and I couldn't have this, or I guess I should say there was less of a middleman there, where I started realizing that if church leaders were wrong about this, then I need to start questioning other things that they say, and I need to have more personal revelation to tell me what is right and wrong. And as I started to shift my relationship with God to be more personal, that's when I started being more okay with myself. And that's where I'm at now, is being happy with who I am and accepting and liking this aspect of myself.
Yeah. As you're saying this, it sounds like it's absent of like anger or resentment at those church leaders that kind of I guess using the best knowledge they had pushed you down a path that led to some really painful experiences. And I guess I just want to compliment that maturity, that you can look at that and not be super angry and resentful. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That'd be hard.
I mean, maybe it's because we just read it in the Come Follow Me reading, but it's reminding me of Joseph of Egypt, when the brothers come and they're all reconciled, and he's like, it's okay, God led us here.
Yeah.
And he just forgives them. It sounds like you're just grateful that you're at a place where you're affirming of who you are, and you're not focusing on the pain that was caused.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the scriptures, because that is another thing that helped me get to where I'm at, is that I started to realize that there's so many places in scripture where the prophet and his disciples, or the people helping him, make mistakes, and that doesn't take away their prophetic role. I think there's a tendency in church culture now that everything has to be right or it's all wrong. And I don't think that that's ever been the way that people have looked at the gospel in the past. Like I think of Moses being chastised by multiple different people, Jonah running away from God and had to be swallowed by a whale, and then going and doing his role, Lehi murmuring against God, and Nephi having to reprimand him. Joseph Smith himself has multiple times in the Doctrine and Covenants where God has to correct him and put him in a new direction. And none of those men were deemed to be no longer prophets. They were still regarded as leaders and still continued to do great things after that fact. And so seeing that is also something that's helped me to realize that these men, I feel, and this is again personal feeling here, but I truly feel like our leaders of the church are inspired by God. But I think that just like you and I, they make mistakes. There's only been one perfect person to have ever lived, and that's Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And so if I am willing, or if I want people to give me grace and allow me the chance to make mistakes, then I need to give that to other people, and that includes our church leaders.
Yeah, Dustin, what you're saying reminds me of the story that a friend said of a clear example of an apostle who was trying to defend the Savior, Peter, who defended the Savior by wounding someone, by cutting off his ear, and then what the Savior did was he healed the wound. And so what I'm hearing you say is you were wounded by church leaders, and you turned to Christ for healing.
Yeah, and it's still a process, and I feel like that's a process for everybody, that we're all going through this whole life is trying to be healed by Jesus Christ. And I just no longer think that the healing that I'm looking for is being straight.
Recording this podcast is really fun, but right now I'm just like feeling a lot of sadness, just for like the ways that we hated ourselves, and for the people today who probably hate themselves, and the extent that people go to try and change something that we couldn't change.
Yeah.
And I just want to live in a world where something that we don't choose isn't something that we hate and then go through extreme lengths to try and change.
Yeah. Something I don't know if this kind of fits in with what you're saying, but it just came to my mind. Something that I've been thinking about a lot recently is that this life, at least we're taught, is meant for as a teaching opportunity, to prepare us for the next life. And so I feel like a lot of the stuff we're going through is meant to create that next life. And something else I've been thinking a lot in regards to that is diversity. And we have so many different types of people in this life, people who have different colors of skin, different colors of eyes, heights, sexual orientation,
different kinds of pets.
Yeah, there's so much diversity here, and most of all of this diversity is created by God. He created all of us looking differently. We all have different personalities, and I don't think that God would have created so much diversity here if it wasn't necessary for us to understand and accept and value diversity if it's not going to be in the next life. I truly feel like in the next life we're going to continue to be diverse. I'm going to be who I am. Charlie, you're going to be who you are. That what's the point of learning and accepting to this diverse world to only go into a world where we're all the same in the next life? And that is something that's really helped me to love who I am and to appreciate the differences in others too.
You are so impressive. I just think you're a really impressive person.
Well, he used to live in Washington, so.
And I will never move back. I think the same thing about you guys. Like I feel like I wouldn't have come on this podcast if I didn't feel like it was going to be beneficial to other people. And I think that this media that you guys have created, this podcast, this YouTube series, has definitely been helping a lot of people. And I just hope that this message will help other people, especially people who are considering going through conversion therapy or people who have gone through it, to be able to reconcile with that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your heart and being so brave and so vulnerable and having our most explicit episode to date.
Yeah. And Dustin, I hope you get a lot of love from listeners for just your openness and your honesty.
Please don't hate me.
We don't.
Yeah.
We don't.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have enjoyed this or other episodes, please consider leaving a review, following us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Questions from the Closet, or sharing this podcast with someone you love. And as always, please remember that we do not represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or Brigham Young University. We are not trying to be prescriptive or tell anyone what to think or what to do.
You heard 3 perspectives, and there are many, many more. We encourage you to listen to other voices and hear a wide variety of experiences. If you would like to submit a question or share a comment about today's episode, you can email us at questionsfromthecloset@gmail.com.
Until next time.